I'm Monica Vink with TIF. Thank you for joining us for our next video in our series covering the TIF Climbing Facilities White Paper. Today we have Josh Huff, Dale Heath, Ryan Carr, and Scott Vance discussing the mission of the paper and the roles and responsibilities each of our stakeholders play to support this overall mission.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me this afternoon to talk about the Climbing Facilities White Paper. One of the first things I want to talk about, I think it's important for the viewers to hear, is the genesis of the white paper and how it came to be. So I know I stepped in to help out a little bit, probably at the midway point or thereafter when we were in DC. But I know you two were there from the start. Can you talk to me a little bit how the idea originated?
Sure, you bet. Scott, can I start?
Yeah.
You know, it was great. It all came about from a group of guys just sitting together over some coffee, just talking about what was going on in the industry and bringing up photos that they had on their cameras. And these photos were basically showing what was happening in their industry, why things weren't being protected. And we were specifically looking at the safety climb at that certain point in time. Our climbing facility at that time, there was no really understanding of how it should be protected or the communication. And the biggest thing that we heard back then was, well, who should we have told? I mean, what should we have gone to the engineer? Should we have gone to the manufacturer? Should we have gone back to the end user, to the person paying the bills? And really, there was no definitive question or definitive answer for this. So we started talking more and more about getting together and seeing if we can't take a problem and solve it. And that actually grew from a handful of people to more people to more people. And eventually in DC, I think there was, 25 individuals coming together from all different types of industry to talk about it.
Sounds about right. Pretty large group by the end.
That's
It was several groups. As the group grew, it started, as Dale mentioned, with a small group of just individuals talking about difficulties. And as the group grew, we brought in more areas, or what we call in the paper stakeholders, into the group to help give their views and explain the difficulties that they face in the construction process.
And I'll say the one thing that I loved about that group of individuals when it ended up in DC was not only did you have the support and care from TIA itself, but you had each stakeholder. You had competitors coming together, you had contractors and manufacturers and operators all come together for a common goal. And that was wonderful to see.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like one of the issues you identify was the breakdown in communication. So while the paper is entitled Climbing Facilities, there's also a secondary subject, which is that breakdown in communication. The contractor didn't know who to call or how to escalate any issues that arise on site. So Ryan, from a contractor perspective, could you kind of shed some light on some of those communication issues that are kind of common?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, to this day, it still kind of fascinates me just a little bit that we work in the communications industry, but yet a lot of times our communication can be very poor. The communication lapse happens at all levels of our phase. So we miss communications from the field because maybe our field guys, our field crews don't have the proper training, don't have the comfortability with picking up the phone and calling and asking the questions or asking the right questions. And then we have certain people in the management process for construction that will field questions, but then they don't know where to turn. So then they go back to the reluctant answer of, well, we just need to get this done. So to be a little bit more specific, we have had instances before where the information has lapsed. It's either inaccurate, it's incomplete, or it's just not available at the time of conception or at the time of construction. And what this leads to for us out in the field is we don't have the proper equipment to go on proper structures. So a problem that we face a lot of times is certain mounts will be spec'd out. Right now we've got a very large 5G push going out nationwide. So external auxiliary radio mounts have become very popular as opposed to overloading the existing sector frames. We're using an auxiliary mount for our radios, our filters, our OVP devices, whatever it is, and they aren't spec'd for tower. they're spec'd just in a general sense, and we're seeing approximately 30 to 35% failure rate on those, or a improper installation rate on those, because the A&E firms or the general contractor didn't have the accurate information to get those things out there. And then what happens while we're out in the field, because we don't have the communication flow that we need, that's where we start to impede our climbing facilities. Because we put these things up, the field crews will install it to the best of their ability without making those phone calls, and then we end up with obstructions, we end up with damaged safety climbs, we end up with mounts that aren't installed as per design, and it's a fairly large problem.
And we manufacturers need to take some of that responsibility as well, because we don't understand in some cases how these products are going to be used. So without the great feedback loop, or the way that we're understanding how they're being used, we can't redesign them, or we can't add these features in there, and that's always created a problem.
Can't fix what you don't know is an
What we
issue.
don't know.
So I think that kind of leads into the way that the group came up with try to alleviate some of these communication issues, is defining the roles and responsibilities for each stakeholder: the manufacturer, the contractor, engineer, end user, and the structure owner. So can you kind of go through a little bit the importance and how that's helped in defining the roles and responsibilities from a manufacturer perspective?
From a manufacturer's perspective, sure. I mean, for us, it was really understanding first, what did we need to do as manufacturers? So it was great. Came together as a group, first of all, which is fantastic to see manufacturers come together for the single cause. Second, then we defined what our problem was out there in the field. So we talked to contractors. We started understanding where are they having difficulties? Where are we lacking in having access to cable guides? Should we put extra holes here so we can bolt on a transition for the safety climb or the climbing facility? Do we need to redesign so that we have access for the safety climb to come through, as long as we're probably matched to meeting OSHA requirements? All of this information came to us first, but most importantly, what it was how do we affect the other groups, those roles and responsibilities that we were talking about a little bit earlier? How do we impact that other group?
Absolutely. So one of the last things I want to talk about is, this white paper has been out now for a little over a year. We published in 2019. Have you had any real life in the field examples of how this paper has, or if it has, improved communications or better the lines of communications amongst the stakeholders? Ryan, you have any examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, from a contractor stance, it's been great. It actually lays out a very nice pathway from field to engineer and manufacturers, and kind of enlightens us to say, yes, we actually can make this phone call and say, no, this isn't going to work. We need to discuss this. And then we can have a dialogue. Okay, well, why is it not working? Mm-hmm. What is the issue? And it allows us to have a voice. It allows us to have, I guess, a little bit of say in how things are manufactured to make things flow and work just a little bit better.
As a manufacturer, it was easier for us because we needed that feedback, or that understanding of who to go to next. We often take phone calls from contractors or engineers saying, can you do this? But when somebody creates a problem or sees a problem, identifies a problem, then where do we go to next? Who's the next level of responsibility? So it was important to understand what that next step was, or who we should bring into that contact. And I thought it helped us tremendously, not only from a design aspect for all manufacturers, but also for an understanding. We now actually look at our drawings and put placements on the drawings that identify the climbing facility and how to address that, which we never did in the past. It was never really expected of us. We now look at place and show people and different products that they can utilize to service them when they run into this problem on a climbing leg, or the climbing facility is obstructed. So this is great for manufacturer.
So Ryan, on that communication issue, one of the things the group did in DC was set out to specifically define the roles and responsibilities for each of the stakeholders. Scott, can you kind of go through and just talk about the importance of defining the roles and responsibility, and how it improved communication and the availability of information?
Sure. So as we met, it became clear that there was confusion in how to communicate and what the roles and responsibilities of each stakeholder group were. So as we developed the paper, we identified those, included them in the paper on and how to communicate.
It was pretty interesting. We actually took the stakeholders. We took the contractors, the manufacturers, the structure owners, the engineers, and as Scott was saying, when they defined basically what their responsibilities were, and most importantly, what the feedback loop was and the ask was for them, so that they knew who to go to. It's a great part.
And it's just kind of combined, so all the parties know how to speak with each other.
Correct.
So Scott, can you talk about that as well? How, the real life example, how this white paper has impacted the engineering community?
Sure. What became clear during our discussions was that a lot of the stakeholders had the idea that only a single engineer was performing all of the engineering duties on a project, and that's very far from the truth. We have several different engineering groups. We have engineers that work for the end users. We have engineers that work for the structure owners, and sometimes we have engineers that are working directly for the contractors. So it's not the same individual or even group of individuals in many cases. And so that can cause a communication breakdown in the process.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time here to talk a little bit about the climbing facilities white paper, and I hope this has been valuable for you.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Thank you again to everyone for tuning in to the TIF video series on climbing facilities, and a huge thank you to all the stakeholders working so diligently on the TIF White Paper Working Group.